I knew this was going to be the most difficult and challenging thing I'd ever done. That's purely from a craft standpoint. Then when you pair it with the subject matter, I just knew it was going to be. I mean, there were moments where I thought maybe it was impossible. Living a life that is of worth. There's some cost with that.
This beautiful melanin goddess that's before me. Hello. Coming up on another act, I talk with Oscar-winning director Barry Jenkins about his new series, The Underground Railroad, and exactly what he's actively doing behind the scenes to ensure creators of color get a chance to tell more stories. Last we talked, we discussed how you're from Liberty City, where so many talented football athletes hail from. And I read that you played football specifically for Miami Northwestern Senior High School, but then you pivoted to the arts. Does football still play a role into your success now? And if so, how is that?
I think it does in a small way. I think that the coaches, those were the men who were the role models in my life, and the way they motivated us to become the best version of ourselves that we could be, both on the field and off the field. I think it is something that I take with me to my film sets. I think I treat my crew and the cast included like a team in a certain way. And I think there's something really beautiful about that, because a coach doesn't do anything. You're not actually on the field making the plays. I think as a director, you can get in your head and think that you are the one doing everything, that you're responsible for everything. It's because of you that it works. And it's so very clear to me that that isn't the case. It takes a village.
Yeah. Well, how do you kind of manage personal pressure? And I guess I'm asking that specifically because coming off of something as massive of a success story as Moonlight was, and then deciding that Underground Railroad was the first thing, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you're going to do in the aftermath of that success. How did that work out for you, and why did you make that particular choice? Like, why was that the right next step for you following that?
It's interesting. It wasn't about building a path, and it wasn't about next steps for me with deciding to make the show. I was just, obsessed with the subject matter, and in love with the book, with the work that Colson had created. And so it was kind of nice because I kind of divorced myself from the pressure of making a choice, in response to all the things that were happening with Moonlight. I've always tried to be guided by, my own personal prerogative and my own personal artistic obsessions. And I think making the show was that way. It just so happens, because we started this even before Moonlight release, it just so happened that it then ended up, being this thing that was following this other thing that in some ways became, I don't know, culturally significant.
Where do they?
So much of your work feels like activism inside of activism. I remember telling you that I thought that about Bill Street, even, that the love story itself felt like activism inside of Hollywood. Certainly some of the shots, and I think the choices that you made in that film, to me, felt like you were really trying to make a statement beyond, just making this beautiful piece of work. And this new series feels very much the same way. Talk to me a little bit about that, because why is that so important for you?
I think it's important to me because what I do, there's a great privilege in it. I'm very privileged to be able to do this, and I think with that there comes a responsibility to have it be more than just art for art's sake. I don't consider myself an activist out and out. I have too much respect for what actual activists do. But I do think in the creation of these images, especially because people are watching more than they're reading these days, it is important to utilize the opportunity to speak to something that is greater than just art for art's sake.
Giving us a really good story seems to be important to your art. Giving us more than a really good story, I should say, seems to be really important to your art. And I want to explore that. Where does that come from for you?
I don't know. I think it just comes from, maybe my grandma, who always used to get on me about doing better and doing good, and making something of yourself. But it's interesting. Sometimes we hear people say, "Oh, you got to make something of yourself," and we think of that as achieving some kind of level of commercial success. But I think for my grandma, it was about living a life that is of worth. And I think in telling these stories, hopefully I'm fulfilling the promise or the hope that she saw in me.
And how does this new series play into that?
Oh, I mean, this one, like, oh my goodness. This one was a project I always knew I wanted to do something that dealt with the condition of American slavery as a way of using my voice to honor my ancestors. And so this one was incredibly important in that regard. To be honest, it was more about always being aware that I am an artist first, and I have to make this thing, with a certain level of artistic principles, and that it's not just a piece that I'm making to fulfill this duty that I have to my ancestors. Now, it can be one and the same, and I do think the art is most potent, when those things are fused, when they're paired together. At least my art is most potent when they are.
Moonlight When, how did that change things for you as a director, kind of leaving that big stage and then going into this project immediately after?
Yeah, I didn't feel more free. I'm gonna be
Mm.
honest. I mean, I'd never done television and at this scale for sure. I'd only done one episode, and having talked to people like Steven Soderbergh and Cary Fukunaga, who had both directed entire seasons of television shows, I knew this was going to be the most difficult and challenging thing I'd ever done. That's purely from a craft standpoint. Then when you pair it with the subject matter, I just knew it was going to be. I mean, there were moments where I thought maybe it was impossible, but given where I am in my career right now and my obsession with the art form, I should be trying to do impossible things. That should be the goal. And so
Yeah.
I kind of relished it and threw myself into it.
What did you bring from your experience with filmmaking into this TV series that maybe we don't often get to see from someone coming from that space? Like, was there something that you said, this might not normally happen in television making, but I want to bring this element to this series because this is what I know to be true?
Yeah, no, we approached it all the same way. We approached it all the same way. And to be honest, it was more about us making sure we didn't change the way we do things coming into television. There's some cost with that. This takes place in a time where there isn't any electricity, and a lot of it takes place at night or in dark tunnels underground. There was a version of this where we lit it expecting this is the way a TV show is lit, because I'm sitting in this room right now with all these windows. There's a reason why there are no windows in movie theaters, because some of the imagery is going to take place at night, where people are sitting in dark rooms. We decided that we weren't going to alter the way we present images just because we can't control, the place that people are going to watch them. So no, we did it all the same way we always do.
Yeah, I love that. How did things change for you once you won that Oscar? And then when you came back with Beale Street, also getting some more acclaim right after that, were you feeling like you were being listened to in a way that perhaps you weren't before? Or were you been invited into rooms that maybe you couldn't imagine you would have been invited to before?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is easier to get a response to an email, after you have an Oscar, especially with the visibility of the way that we did win. So that changed. The simplest change was I went from a person who was always trying to convince people to say yes to a person who had to be really diligent about often saying no, because there were so many opportunities, but they weren't all the right opportunity. That was the biggest change.
I love that you said that. And also, you're doing some really great stuff too. I remember asking you a couple of years ago about your interest in making some sports movies. I know that was the first, I think, screenplay that you wrote. What was a football story? But what we do know you have coming is a Clarissa Shields film that you're working on. What can you tell us about that? Where is that right now, and when might that kind of kick into
Yeah.
action?
It's one of those things, man. The film, it started filming actually right before the shutdown. And now that things, thankfully, because the most important thing was getting the country and the world healthy, and back to a place where it's safe to work. And now that it is, we're picking the show back up. So yeah, all
Okay.
good.
Good stuff. And when is that football movie coming to life? When are we going to see that happen, Barry?
It's interesting, man. There's a very, very powerful person who got a hold of that script and is very interested in it. I would love to maybe make it someday, because I do think there's so much about me that was developed at that time. I'm talking about me as a human being. So maybe someday. But yeah, it's not it's not that it's not possible. It's just about right now finding the right time and place to do it.
Barry Jenkins, thank you so much for chatting with me today. You are excellence. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, my dear. It's a pleasure.